In the early 20th century, Europe stood on the edge of a powder keg. Great empires were racing for military power and global influence, building bigger armies and deadlier weapons. No one seemed to realize that a single spark could set the entire continent on fire, igniting a conflict that would change the world forever. And in 1914, that spark finally appeared. World War I had begun. So what pushed the world into this catastrophic war? Europe was divided by a web of complex and fragile military alliances. On one side, you had the Central Powers, which included Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. On the other, the Allied Powers, made up of Britain, France, Russia, and many others. It was a continent holding its breath. Nations were locked in a fierce arms race, competing to build the most powerful battleships, the deadliest cannons, and the fastest-firing rifles. At the same time, extreme nationalism was spreading like wildfire, especially in the Balkan region. Many ethnic groups there desperately wanted independence from the massive Austro-Hungarian Empire. The tension grew darker and heavier with each passing day, as the storm of conflict approached. Then, on June 28, 1914, the city of Sarajevo in Bosnia became the center of world history. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was assassinated on a city street by a Serbian nationalist. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Austria-Hungary, enraged, declared war on Serbia. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of the Slavic peoples, mobilized its massive army to defend Serbia. This brought Germany into the fray, as it had promised to support Austria. Fearing unchecked German expansion, Britain and France joined the conflict to stop them. Within just a few weeks, what started as a regional crisis had spiraled out of control. Almost all of Europe was now engulfed in the flames of war. The Western Front quickly became the symbol of World War I's unimaginable brutality. Thousands of miles of trenches scarred the landscape, stretching all the way from the North Sea down to the Swiss border. For the soldiers who lived there, life was a nightmare of mud, rats, and the constant, deafening roar of artillery fire. Gaining even a few meters of ground cost thousands of lives. This was the grim reality of trench warfare, where every attack was a near impossible gamble against machine guns and barbed wire. Some of the most infamous battles in history were fought here. The Battle of the Somme turned green fields into a hellish ocean of fire and mud, with over 1 million casualties. The Battle of Verdun was a 10-month meat grinder, a desperate struggle of attrition that also cost over 1 million lives. And as if that wasn't enough, new horrors were introduced to the battlefield. Deadly mustard gas, a silent killer, drifted through the trenches, causing horrific burns and agonizing deaths. Machine guns could wipe out entire units of charging soldiers in a matter of seconds. In this war, there was no truly safe place, not even far behind the front lines. The threat of death was everywhere. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the war was just as devastating but fought on a much larger scale. The sheer size of the front made it incredibly difficult for Russia to defend effectively. Worse still, the sheer size of the front made it incredibly difficult for Russia to defend effectively. Worse still, the Russian troops were poorly equipped. They often lacked basic necessities like weapons, ammunition, and even food. The massive losses at the front fueled deep anger and unrest back home among the Russian people. The situation finally boiled over in 1917, when the Russian Revolution erupted, toppling the Tsar and ending centuries of imperial rule. The new government, desperate for peace, signed a Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and withdrew Russia from the war. This was a huge strategic victory for Germany, allowing it to move hundreds of thousands of experienced troops from the Eastern Front to the West. The war wasn't just fought on land. It raged on the high seas and in the skies above. In the oceans, German U-boats, or submarines, spread fear across the Atlantic. They waged a ruthless campaign, sinking supply ships bound for Britain in an attempt to starve the island nation into submission. But they didn't just target military vessels. Even civilian passenger ships were in their sights. The sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, which killed over 1,000 people, including many Americans, shocked and outraged the world. Above the trenches, airplanes became weapons of war for the first time. Initially, they were just used for scouting, flying over enemy lines to gather information. But it wasn't long before they were armed with machine guns, and the skies became a new battlefield. Daring pilots engaged in deadly dogfights, aerial duels that filled the skies with danger and a strange kind of glamour. Pilots like the legendary Red Baron, Manfred Bone Richtofen became feared aces and household names, symbols of a new, modern form of combat. For the first few years of the war, the United States had remained officially neutral. But that was about to change. In 1917, British intelligence intercepted a secret message from Germany to Mexico. Known as the Zimmermann Telegram, it urged Mexico to attack the United States if America entered the war, promising to help Mexico reclaim lost territories in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The message outraged the American government and public. At the same time, German submarines resumed their unrestricted attacks, sinking several American ships. The combination of these provocations was the final straw. In April 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. Soon, American soldiers, known as doughboys, began arriving in Europe in massive numbers. Their fresh strength, energy, and resources tipped the balance of the entire war decisively in favor of the Allies. With the Eastern Front closed and Russia out of the war, Germany decided to risk everything on one final, massive offensive in the spring of 1918. The attack, known as the Spring Offensive, was meant to break the Allied lines before the American forces could arrive in full strength. At first, it seemed to work. The Germans gained significant ground, pushing the Allies back further than they had in years. But the German army was exhausted. Its supplies were dwindling, and morale was collapsing after 4 years of brutal warfare. The Allies held their ground, and then they counterattacked with overwhelming force, now bolstered by American troops. They pushed the German lines back on every front. The German army began to crumble. Back in Germany, the situation was just as dire. The nation's economy was broken, and people were starving. Revolts and protests erupted across the country. The military leadership finally admitted that the war was lost. On November 11, 1918, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, Germany signed an armistice. The guns on the Western Front finally fell silent. World War I had come to an end. The aftermath of the war was catastrophic. More than 10 million soldiers had been killed, and another 7 million civilians lost their lives. Millions more were permanently injured, disabled, or psychologically scarred. For ancient empires, the German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian had collapsed into dust. The map of Europe was redrawn. The peace that followed was fragile and deeply flawed. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, punished Germany severely. It was forced to accept full blame for the war, give up vast territories, dismantle its military, and pay massive reparations that crippled its economy. This humiliation and economic hardship fueled deep resentment, anger, and extremism within Germany. From these ashes, the dark ideology of fascism began to rise, not just in Germany but across Europe. The war to end all wars had instead sown the seeds for an even more devastating global conflict. The world was unknowingly moving toward World War II. World War I remains one of humanity's most painful and important lessons. It showed the devastating cost of hatred, pride, and unchecked ambition. It demonstrated how quickly alliances, nationalism, and a thirst for power can lead to unimaginable destruction. More than a century later, its scars are still visible on the landscapes and in the collective memory of the world. History reminds us that peace is fragile and must always be actively protected and cherished. That, perhaps, is the true legacy of World War I. Thanks for watching. If you found this video informative, please give it a like and subscribe for more historical content. See you in the next one.